Good afternoon. I'm Governor Scott Walker, and we've got Superintendent of Schools, Superintendent Tony Evers here with us as well. We're both going to talk for a couple minutes. Then we'll take questions on this topic, and at the tail end, if there's time, we'll take a couple other questions on any other subject matter you might have. But obviously, we're both thrilled to be talking about having a new process in the state of Wisconsin, an accountable and fair process in terms of assessing where our school's at and assessing where the dollars are for schools for every public dollar that's spent. So whether it's at a traditional public school, a charter school, or students are part of the choice program, looking ahead to having a fair and accountable system for which everyone in the state can understand the assessment of is incredibly important for us. We're excited about the process that we're kicking off here. The superintendent has done a fabulous job of helping us reach out to a wide and very diverse group of different interests across the state. So we're going to have, again, a very inclusive process, one that's starting out very quickly at the end of the month with the La Follette Institute helping us out with the design team, with the superintendent will be the chair. I would serve as a co-chair, and then several members of the legislature helping us out, as well as, again, groups from School Boards Association, administrators, hopefully teachers and other educators, as well as other active interests from a variety of different educational backgrounds around the state. Certainly, our process is going to lead to the specifics, but something where I think we both jointly feel strongly about is a very comprehensive assessment, again, that's both accountable and fair. What we mean by that is ultimately something where communities, parents, educators, all interested parties can hold individuals and hold ultimately schools accountable, but also a process that's very fair and transparent. Is incredibly important. It means more than just one high-stakes test. It means more than just core competencies in particular areas, but also looking at, are your students at the core level they need to be at? Are the students advancing? Are there other core criteria that are involved in the making of a successful school and a successful program? For us, again, we feel very positive about this. This is something where, again, this is the sort of thing I think people are demanding. They want us to work together. They particularly want us to work together for a good education system in the state. That's good not only just in general, having both an active interest for our children. I know of my kids still having a junior and a senior in school in Wauwatosa East High School. I just have a personal interest as well as an interest on behalf of all the students and families in the state of Wisconsin. But I also know it's one of those where it has an economic impact as well, because if we've got kids who are coming out of school ready for the next step, whether it's technical school, whether it's a college or university, or it's going directly into the workforce long term in the state, if we're going to do well and see the creation of 250,000 or more jobs, we've got to have a skilled workforce, and this is one more step in helping us do that as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Evers, and then, like I said, we'll take questions on this topic first, and then the other questions at the end. Superintendent?
Thanks, Governor. And thank you all for being here. The one thing we do know, because I've said it often and I've heard the governor say it often, is that we do have good public schools in Wisconsin. We do have successful students, and we're working hard to make that success across the state of Wisconsin. We've done important reform work. We've adopted the Common Core state standards. We're developing a new assessment system, a testing system that will be the envy of the country and the world. We're also working together with the governor on the reading task force, and also data systems, and creating world-class data systems where we have good data so that people can make intelligent decisions. The missing piece of the puzzle, though, is around an accountability system. Right now, we're working under an accountability system that was brought to us through the federal government and No Child Left Behind, and frankly, it's a system that is ineffective and inefficient. We have the opportunity here with this design team that we're putting together to create a world-class accountability system that uses multiple measures. As the governor said, it not only will take a look at test data from a benchmark point of view, but it also will use growth for students, which is a very important part of the puzzle that's missing. As the governor said, this accountability system will be used for all publicly funded schools, be it our public schools, our traditional public schools, public charter schools, and the choice schools. The part of it that frankly has a great appeal for me, and I will say I'm jazzed about it, is that it will help us target low-performing schools and target high-performing schools, whereas the present system doesn't have those shades of differentiation. And the reason that's important is, as a state, we have an obligation to take the practices in those high-performing schools and spread them across to the state and to other schools. At the opposite end, we have limited resources, and so we need to target those low-performing schools so we can provide the support to make them to raise their performance. So this is a great opportunity for us. We have the right people that will be participating in this. I fully intend at some point during the process, once it becomes more soup, we'll be looking to request a waiver from the Department of Education in Washington to allow this new and exciting accountability system to replace what is part of No Child Left Behind. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions with the governor. Thank you.
How do you envision teacher accountability being a part of this? Will there be any element that looks at the performance of individual teachers or district-wide?
Well, at some point in time, the data systems that inform both those efforts are the same. And so it's clear that at some point in time we'll be taking a look at those accountability systems having a connection. But initially we have to make sure that we get a good start on both of them, and then we'll see what kind of merger takes place after that. But clearly the fact that the data systems that inform decision makings in both of them are the same would lead one to believe that there will be some connection at some point in time.
Have you two talked about the criteria that you'd like to see used for evaluating teachers, and to what extent are you on the same page, a different page on what those criteria are?
I'll just take a quick, there are two separate processes that we're working on here. The accountability system that the governor and I were just talking about is about school and school district accountability. We have another group that is working hard on the educator effectiveness, the educator evaluation piece. And from my point of view, it's premature to say what those factors should be. We want to let that, at least, we need to have that collaborative effort play out.
When you say we have a group, who would we be?
Well, it's a group that I appointed as state superintendent. It includes the head of WEAC, it includes the head of the School Board Association, the Principals Association, and so on. The governor has graciously provided staff members that interface and interact as members of that committee also.
And our thought, Jason, on that is on the design team, all those interested parties the superintendent talked about, and really a very diverse, wide, casting a pretty broad net in terms of you've got administrators, school boards association, teachers union, various teachers unions have been invited, but you have other groups like private schools, School Choice Wisconsin, university interest, really just about everybody in the state who's got an active interest in education or education reform is going to be involved in this process, and I think that's incredibly important. But I just want to underline what the superintendent said. This is about school and school district accountability. Certainly the systems that come out of this, and it's why it's so important. I use these words repeatedly, but it's not just an accountability system. It's about being fair and accountable. Because I think it's important for every school. It certainly eventually, as some of these things, the data collection parallels what may come out of accountability for teachers and other educators. Again, it's very important that it's a fair, transparent, open process, one in which people can see exactly what's going into it. And then that way I think there's buy-in. We don't want, at the end of this, to have a debate about the system that's used to assess where our school is at. We want to have a consensus over that, and then we can have a healthy discussion about what schools are high performing and how do we replicate that, and what schools, hopefully fewer and fewer, what schools are not performing and what do we do to help them out.
Did you bring any Democrats in on this? Did you bring any Democrats in?
Well, process-wise, the design team would include the chairs of the Education Committee and the Assembly and the Senate and the ranking members. So no matter what the makeup is now and in the future, you'd have 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans invited to be a part of that.
But I mean, the partnership that you guys are forming to push for this, did you talk to any Democrats about bringing them in to talk to them, maybe making more bipartisan with the legislative?
We put it out, this was mainly between the 2 of us to begin with in terms of inviting. The letter we used to invite the participants that went out last week came from the superintendent and I, divide all the different parties we talked about, including some the lawmakers, the 4 I just referenced, but then including all the other groups as well. So our hope would be we'd have active participants, again, in the legislature in both political parties, as well as from a very diverse group of education interests.
I just had a question for the superintendent. Why would you need a waiver from no child?
Why would I need a waiver for that? Well, presently, the accountability system through No Child Left Behind is very specific, and frankly, it's a one-size-fits-all. It doesn't fit every state, and it doesn't fit our state for sure. And so in order for us to take what we're going to be working on now and implement that to replace that accountability system, we would need a waiver from the federal government.
Governor, the exciting thing, Steve, on that, just one other thing, because both the superintendent and I have talked numerous times to Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education, and I think, and we haven't talked to him in the last couple of days, but I think this is exactly the sort of thing he's kind of asking for from the states, because there is a clear concern, not only here in Wisconsin, but across the country, that under the current criteria of No Child Left Behind, you're going to have very few, if any, schools left in any of the states that do not fall back under that criteria, because as the superintendent mentioned, one size fits all. Good example, somewhere we'd like to change. Right now, certainly one measure amongst many should be how many kids are at core or at advanced or proficient in core areas. So we talk a lot about reading. 3rd grade, that's an important time, because if you're reading at advanced or core in reading at 3rd grade, that's a pretty good indicator that you're going to then learn to read, and at that point forward, you're going to use reading to learn. But that's not the only factor. One of the other things we're looking at, or we put in the kind of at the high end, getting the detail with this design team, is the growth. So if you have a school that's got a group of 8th graders, and they took them from 4th grade reading level up to 7th grade, that should be worth something. Even though they're not yet at 8th grade, they have advanced significantly. Under No Child Left Behind, that's a failing school, because they're not at 8th grade. So it's got to be more than just one factor, multiple factors. And I think what you've seen, you see this nationally in discussion about it, Secretary Duncan is very interested. He doesn't want to give a waiver just to get out of it. But if there are states that are willing to step up and find a better way of doing this, which is exactly what we're hoping for, I think the Secretary of Education is very interested in working with states like Wisconsin. It's why the more transparent, the more inclusive the process, the more likely it is we get success.
I'll just add one more thing. One thing I forgot to mention that will be clearly different than the federal model is that we'll be looking at college and career readiness also, which is not anywhere part of No Child Left Behind, and it's a critical factor for success for our kids. I'm sorry.
Governor, is there any pushback from within your own party, being that No Child Left Behind was born out of a Republican administration?
You know, for us, I'm not so much interested in that as I am about looking to move forward with a better plan. Wisconsin has been a leader in reform in so many areas in the past. I think this is a great example where we can be a leader again. And as long as we're not worried about, you look at national level, George W. Bush signed it, but Ted Kennedy was the Senate author. I think now we recognize it was done with good intentions by many of those folks, but it's not going to work for Wisconsin, and we've got a better way of a process, at least, to put in place a better product.
Governor, on a different topic, Representative Bartlett today called on you to reject redistricting maps Republicans put forward in a spirit of bipartisanship and appoint some kind of nonpartisan panel or go a different way. What's your reaction to that?
I'll have to look at the legislative process as a ways off, but I think the bottom line, when I was in the legislature a decade ago, I was involved with redistricting. We took a lesson from the courts, who were very interested in making sure there was a community of interest was maintained as much as possible in legislative districts, and that minority voter participation was maximized. To me, no matter what the process is, the product is the most important thing in the courts, and ultimately would be for me. So I'm going to look at what the product is. I haven't looked at the maps yet, so it would be premature to talk about the process.
He says that this is going to be a test of your leadership as to whether you will truly be bipartisan going forward or not. Do you see it that way?
No, I think what people want, when I hear repeatedly in terms of bipartisan, is things like we're doing right now. They want us to focus on education, jobs, and health care. And so in each of those areas, we're going to focus on reaching out, not just Democrat, Republican, but bringing diverse interests together. We've done it in the Read to Lead initiative. This is a great way of partnering together. I think in those issues, the more we get people involved, that's what at least people I talk to, they're talking about jobs, they're talking about schools, and they're talking about health care.
Got time for one or two more?
Would you respond to Mayor Soblin commenting on Madison's financial state? He says it's the worst in 4 decades, and because of reduced state aid, they could see layoffs. What is your reaction?
I have to look at the specifics, but I've seen both schools and local governments across the state who've been able to use the tools that we gave them earlier this year, and in turn have been able to restore what they projected to be as layoffs. My hope is, whether it's Madison or anywhere else, they'll do what they're doing in Kaukauna or Racine County or other places and use those tools to protect middle-class jobs at the same time they're protecting middle-class taxpayers.
Back on this initiative, Governor, the head of WEAC says this looks like it might be a pretty good idea, but they don't trust you. Why should they trust you?
I think, again, the process is the important thing. It's going to be very transparent. I think for anyone who's want to look back in time, even the last 2 or 3 months, look at Superintendent Evers and I have been involved leading up the Read to Lead task force. I think actions speak louder than words, and in that case, you've got a very diverse group of interests who've had a very productive series of meetings each month, and I think are going to ultimately have a great product and a great series of recommendations. I'd say look at the process. Having them participate doesn't mean they have to support everything I may have supported in the past or would be in the future, but it's one of those where I think, at least amongst the teachers I know, they're going to want to have, whether it's WEAC or AFT or others, to have a seat at the table, because the more inclusive this is, the better off it is. And I think, having talked to the superintendent, in the end, they're going to see this as a good process and want to be a part of it.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Could I ask a question, please?
Certainly.
Given the fact that this project is designed to look at standards, and given the fact that there are a number of federal guidelines that prohibit asking ethnicity, that sort of thing, I think it's fair to assume that there are a number of schools where you can assume that the vast majority of those students are of the black community or the Hispanic community or whatever. But my community, which is the tribes, we're usually anywhere from 10 up to, in some instances, 50%. If we're going to assess the schools, presumably we're going to assess the academic success of the students. And is there anything in the law that would preclude the department from zeroing in on Indian students that may be attending the public school? Just get
There's nothing to prevent that, and that's a real important part of developing this accountability system, so that we can target where schools and children are underperforming. So there's nothing to prevent it, and I sure hope to heck we do develop a system where we do identify those targeted populations that deserve to have the resources applied to make sure that they learn better.
Thank you.
Yeah.